had
Uh,
it.
but it's actually pretty awesome. I'll have to freeze that and make it a picture, and then like
Yeah,
that could
good
be something
idea.
cool. We were talking about a moment ago the whole thing about the AI and like self-destruction. And it's interesting with these vortexes. I one thing I was thinking about as I was reading about a lot of the different places was one of the categories specifically was near military bases. Very interesting. Also, something to consider though is that these vortexes are based off of areas that have these like really long historical significance. We're looking at like a couple thousand years BC, right? Stonehenge, the standing stones and in the Hudson River Basin and all that sort of stuff. These military bases didn't exist back then, so it's kind of like an added. That seemed to me to be the thinnest of the criteria. Although the rest were super interesting, and but the fact that they are hovering um over our nukes made me think of three different like distinct kind of things about that, and I was going to discuss those with you. Number one, the one we're all kind of immediately thinking is they're shutting our nukes down or they're warning us, hey, you're going to kill yourselves, right? That's like the most positive thing. The next one, the most negative thing, is they're thinking about this is a weapon that maybe the only weapon that could be significantly it could be significantly dangerous to us, whether we use it on them or we use it on the world that they want to absorb resources from. So it's a threat to them. The third thing I was thinking was, I wonder if, this is something I meant to research and I'll look more into for the future, but what the electromagnetic, like, like if they are specifically looking for vortexes and they're covering over these nuke sites as kind of a side effect, like they're like looking, like if they really are, if the UFOs or extraterrestrials are utilizing these vortices as like something in order to absorb the energy, some almost like a gas station, really like draw it out and cran,
Mhm.
or be able to use it and store it. If they're just kind of looking for these electromagnetic fields, and then their detection devices of whatever source they are lead them to these nuclear sites, and they kind of hover over and kind of like, oh, there's a ton of energy down there, and they go, and then they check it out and they fuck around with it and they pull up. But I think the first two are more like likely possibilities, either like a positive or negative um possibility on why they're hovering over. Because I mean, we're looking now at like, I think in the last month alone, I've watched 4 different documentaries specifically describing them hovering over nuclear sites. Right. So it's either like, is it positive? Is it
I don't know, but you know what? Like in terms of all that you just said, there's a lot. There's a lot of things to talk about with vortices, I guess you should say. And so, first of all, what's interesting to me is that you look at all these like significant archaeological sites throughout the world, right? You named a couple: Stonehenge. I think you said the Great Pyramids. There's a
Hudson
bunch.
River Bend. It was a new one that I followed in that documentary you sent out. So that one I had not been following closely. I knew the area for famous UFOs, but as
Oh, you
far
talking
as
about Sedona or whatever it's called?
so no, Sedona,
Sedona.
there's no, on the Hudson River Bay was
Oh
where
yeah, that one. Okay, yeah.
Basin, Hudson River Basin is what I meant.
Mhm. Well, that's another thing. But first of all, we just have to point out that there are significant electrical magnetic places on planet Earth. That's just like, okay, these ancient civilizations somehow knew it, right? Well, it can't happen by chance. It is, it's too minimal of a percentage. And so, okay, there's that. And then there's the whole theory of like how the electromagnetic force works on Earth. And so a vortex, of course, is defined to be this intersection with magnetic lines that kind of map out around the Earth's circumference in certain paths, and then you get these intersection points with like three or so, uh, parts of that electromagnetic effect, and it creates this kind of central point to energy. It's like an energy hotspot, if you will, but it's not like it's hot or like, you're going to go over there and you get melted or something. It's this kind of unseen energy, magnetism, and of course
Yeah.
electricity and
It was
magnetism are the same. So
it was really interesting, like looking at like what was built there, and then kind of like trying to figure out exactly what they were doing with what they built. When I was looking at, so like the Hudson River Bay, I was fascinated about when I was watching that one, because that Hudson River Basin, excuse me, it's the the area around the Hudson River there, um, because there's some really interesting kind of like scientific conundrums, if you will, especially related to like what I thought was fascinating, especially related to what you were talking about these ancient civilizations, where they're finding these areas where modern day they're having clustered UFO sightings. And there's one in 1983 where they had 5,000 911 calls over these boomerang shaped UFOs in this area. So you have like these, and that I've actually have seen in documentaries before, specifically that event, because it's such a wild, that event, and what was the lights over Phoenix, right? And there's all these different events that, like, they're like, okay, these like something was there, like, I mean, like
something's going on.
yeah, there's something there, but he saw enough so that they're printing up 911 records, and like, okay, well, 5,000, there's 5,000 reports, but when they started looking at like these clustered areas, they like, okay, they went out, and there were these well, they're not really Native American relics, they're literally just ancient relics that they're not exactly sure it was. And there's like legitimate like not like volatile, or what do you want to say, arguing between scientists on who these ruins come from. And the ones in the Hudson River Basin, like, there's Stonehenge and other ones, but the ones in Hudson River Basin were like these stone houses, and they were kind of narrow, and they had these big stones over the top, right? And they had the standing stone. And you're looking at this like, okay, well, the Native Americans in the area, they use timber to make their huts.
Yeah.
And so like you're looking at, they're talking about like maybe Celtic tribes that like came over there later on, which is interesting, because that definitely could be like it's definitely possible to be like descendants of Stonehenge tribes, right? Because of the same area, and there'd be the same ancient. And you're looking at
but it's very similar style too.
Right, yeah, it's like it's it's shaped in a manner that it takes it. Well, I can't remember if it's sunrise or sunset, but it takes a certain manner of sunlight at a certain time of day, and then the standing stone is put right in front of it. They're talking about them being minimum 800 years old, and so it's like, why?
Yeah, but you can't carbon date stone, so
Right.
you
So
never know how old these motherfuckers are.
Sure. So it's an estimate by whoever the experts are to estimate. But it's interesting about like, so say it's a couple thousand years old, and say it's these Celtic tribes. What's the most interesting thing about it to me is that you got two places that are scientifically vortex sites, right? Because you're looking at energy fields intersecting. You look at high UFO sightings in those areas, and like they actually talk about, like, one of the factors is whether or not there are these ancient sites there. So like what are the how like, you think about like what the wilderness was like back then. This is what like really tripped me out. What the wilderness was like back then. It's not easy walking the woods now, if unless you know what you're doing. And I'll tell you what, like back then, like the wildlife and what they had for equipment, and to be able to move into an area, it's like a trek, and you can't just like wander around the wilderness and find these spots. So somehow they had some sort of guide, whether it was a way they tracked the stars or the sun, but to end up in this energy field, how did they land their ships there and march straight out to that spot? You know what I mean? If it was in fact a Celtic tribe that did it. It's crazy.
or I don't know if you saw the one on the balance stone. There's a lot of balance stones in the ancient Celtic kind of nature, very similar to some in the US, where that would be Northern America versus like, Western Europe or whatever you want to call it. And similar idea. You got a
What
fucking 80-ton giant stone balanced on top of some other stones with some burial thing underneath it, but yet underneath these giant stone, supposedly you could put the seeds of grains. And if you put them there, and they know this scientifically now, it's proven fact. If you put some seeds for some grains underneath that shit, where the balance stone is like right above the ground, it's giant ass shit that's made of quartz. It's got crystals, which in many ways conduct electricity. Put the seeds under there versus seeds not under there. The seeds that you use from under there, that you let them sit for a day, whew, they're going to be way more beastly when they grow and you put them in the ground, you water them. They're going to grow like twice fast shit. So what's going on there, right? Is clearly there is some understanding that this vortex of energies, hotspot, magnetic hotspot on Earth, that you can tap into it with rocks, with their damn little tiny crystals inside. And it's crazy because this shit's all around the world. They got all these standing structures made out of quartz, right? It's basically what quartz is, or granite. Granite's got quartz in it, And so what's going on? Was there an ancient energy grid that everybody could tap into? Sometimes that makes sense to me, but that's true.
and one thing that's interesting to me, and I visited. I think I told you guys before. I visited some of the Mayan temples down in the pyramids down in
Yeah, I'm jealous of that, man.
down southern Mexico, and when we did that, one of the things that really, of all the things, very fascinating, like things that they were just kind of blew my mind. How not to be condescending to like ancient people, but like it always kind of blows my mind how advanced they were in things that we're not advanced in, but then they're not technologically advanced. I think people that are kind of arrogant about our technology in comparison to the past, when there's some things that like you're like, well, okay, well, look at these ancient tribes and they're just like ancient mindsets, but then they literally figured out a way to build a room at this pyramid to where the sun shone through a tiny little hole.
Yep.
And then they built their calendar off of where the light went through that hole and lined up on the calendar.
Super advanced.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think we've talked before about like the aqueducts in ancient Rome, and there's a lot of stuff that they like. It's like almost like their brains were thinking just as advanced as we are, but in a different direction. You know what I mean? Like
kind of like they used it in a sustainable way that wouldn't ruin the earth with the same advanced knowledge.
Like, it's really interesting to me. And then like, so when you're thinking about like, I was thinking about these standing stones, like, okay, well, were they using them as like a type of sundial, perhaps? Just kind of, and then was it, if they weren't using it for time, but they're using the shadow for the sun off the standing stone, because that to me is the most logical thing. And I'm just kind of bullshitting off it because I haven't, studied as much as like, archaeologists probably put time into thought about this, but just kind of thinking from an outside perspective. And then like you have this narrow room, like there's probably some fascinating thing that they did with that standing stone in that room that we just still haven't perceived yet. It'd be interesting.
It's like Indiana Jones, the first one, where they put that staff in there and the light shines and it shows.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the exact spot where the ark was.
Exactly. So that's advanced shit.
We really need to spend like a week in a tent, at a campsite within like, 50 meters of that building and spend the day just chilling there and watching what the light does and seeing if you can see any sort of patterns.
But the next day it'll be different, man. That's the whole thing. You got to study years and years and years of this shit to pick up the patterns. because over time that shit shifts hella, right? Summer solstice, winter solstice. And then so, oh, that thing is right there. But guess what? Then that thing has a 10-year cycle, etc. These all have their own cycle. It's crazy. Uh, I don't know, but you say we went to South America, right? Did you go to Lake Titicaca?
No, I would really like
Okay.
to get out to Machu Picchu. I bet you there's some cool.
Well, Titicaca, that lake is a known vortex hotspot.
Is it?
And dude, yeah, oh yeah, that place is one of the most energetic, magnetic places on Earth. And that fucking lake is goddamn way the fuck up there. I want to say it's like 10,000 feet high in elevation. And so there's been many reports of some kind of unidentified things coming out of the water into the sky, back into the water, back and forth for many years, if not thousands of
12,507.
years. Huh?
I just looked it up for you. 12,507 feet. That's pretty. That's pretty
That's
high.
fucking crazy, right?
Oh.
It's crazy. Think about that shit. And that yet there's a whole civilization up there that utilizes that lake. And it's a magnetic, significant spot on Earth. And the locals for thousands of years have reported things going in and out of the lake. So you tell me, well, how can you interpret that any other way? Like, well, these guys, they were always tripping. They always thought they saw stuff coming out of the lake into the sky. And even nowadays, they probably are just seeing things. There's something there, man. It's an association with the magnetic field. You go back to that video you're talking about, I sent you, with that crazy, amazing image of what looks to be like some undamped or maybe it was damped oscillation that no one can explain. And are there things here tapping into the energy of our Earth that we cannot explain?
Yeah, so
That we
it's,
cannot.
it's interesting to kind of consider if they're tapping in the industry, if the energy, or if they're studying it. You know, if they're just hanging out, checking it out too. It's like, like there was a report that came out last week, a news report that was talking about the a couple of videos that were kind of presented by Jimmy Corbell. You know, he did the documentary Phenomenon, I believe. Oh, was it Phenomenon or I can't remember. These not pyramid, like a pyramid, yeah, pyramid shaped ship. So the pyramid's been the Tic Tac and pyramid have been the ones where there's been like there's a ton of documentation now. Like they so they're showing these pyramid shapes, and they're talking about how they're the same sorts of things we've been talking for a while, able to go much faster than our aircraft. They're able to shift directions directly, and as you were just talking about with Lake Titicaca, they're able to penetrate through the water without slowing down. And then they're like the Pentagon what's the word, not admitted, but shit confirmed that these are legit videos, that they're unsure what they are, and they have a task force that is specifically investigating them. So it's like what's happening right now with our government with this is that they are confirming that yes, they're not calling them UFOs anymore. They're calling them unidentified aerial phenomena, UAFs,
Right.
or UAPs.
UAPs.
And they're like, it's funny because we're at this point now where the government's like, hey, like, we don't know what the hell this shit is, but we're gonna admit now, we're gonna be adults about this, and we're gonna admit now that this exists, and we have people, men in black, whatever you want to call them, that are literally investigating this right now. So it's pretty significant, really, because with the whole what do you call it, the Project Blue Book, right? And that whole era of just like, oh my God, keep this secret because everybody's gonna lose their minds if they find out that
Yeah, for decades.
yeah, is no longer a thing. It's now like, okay, we're not gonna like, expose our national intelligence, because I mean, like, it, according to this report, they are also investigating it being like other nations, and it's an investigation.
Well, sure. Did you see the thing I was saying that former Senator Harry Reid says, "Oh, there's no doubt that it was Putin
Right.
that sent those Pyramid ones to the Navy destroyers off the coast of California." They were talking about in previous episode. But like, why are you all of a sudden saying, "Oh, it's Putin"? So Putin has the technology now to send those random weird things, and we don't know where the fuck they are. I think that's a little bit over top. A little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
either it's like, oh, that fool spilled the guts, and we really are fucked. That fool's got some shit that we don't know about, or he's just like throwing random thoughts in the air that he ain't really thinking about. I don't
You're
know.
referring to the article from the Daily Mail, right? I was just double checking the article. Yeah, the former senator, no question, UFOs near U.S. warships were sent by Putin, and it's
Right.
thin, it's thin to me. That's a thin argument, and I think no question is silly. And I also think that considering the technology, um, who's got the most technologically advanced, there's other countries that come to mind to me besides Russia, to be honest. So like, I mean, like, right, like, and you agree with me, right? Like,
That what?
it's pretty thin to say that was, I could say without a doubt that was another country, and not especially
You can't
when you're
just say that, because
yeah,
that's what my point I was trying to make
yeah,
is if you're
exactly, yeah.
saying that as a former senator and a former like high ranking senator with probably a lot of access to sensitive information, if you're gonna make that claim now, like just blatant, that no doubt, then you're basically saying, oh, these guys have technology, but yet we don't know what the fuck it is.
Yeah,
Right.
it sounds thin to me. That's what I'm saying. I agree with
Yeah.
you. Is what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and and it's also like suggesting that that the Tic Tacs that were seen by the Air Force, a decade and a half ago, and all these other things were suggesting that other countries, which to me is pretty thin. And I I think one of the things about that makes me question it is the quantity of sightings we're seeing worldwide back in the 40s and 50s, when before Project Blue back went through, when it was still like literally the news is like trustworthy, and the news is saying, hey, UFOs exist, here's these places they're happening, this is big news. And then all of a sudden this thing comes through and says, okay, it's all fake, we're going to pretend like it doesn't exist, we're going to turn to science fiction, and we're going to make everybody stop believing it.
Well, yeah.
Like,
I mean, think if instead, if they didn't try to shut this down from the public, even though public's been seeing this shit, they try to ridicule people for seeing some. They say you're crazy, you listen to that. Think if instead we just went with it, right? We accepted it as a thing. And then instead of trying to shut shit down and hide information, we all collectively were like, let's figure out what the fuck this is.
right, let's get the best scientists on the board. On board. There's a great example of
What I'm saying, wait, hold up. What I'm saying is, where will we be now? Now, you know
that's
what I
what I'm
mean?
about. Go ahead, excuse me.
No, that's the last point I want to make. Is like, if we would have not shied everyone down, shut everyone out, and we accepted it as, you know what, you aren't crazy. I saw that shit too. We should figure out what that is. Where
Yeah,
will we be now?
right, dude.
We might be way beyond where we're at now.
A relative example is what Elon Musk was saying about like the technology right now going to space. Whether or not you agree with the investment, when people said like, well, what is he doing right now that all of a sudden we're able to do all these amazing feats and going to Mars and stuff like that? And his answer to that was, it's not because they're doing some secret technological, there's no like huge technological advances in the last 2 years, is because like a decade and a half ago or 2 decades ago, people were like, I'm done with space, and they couldn't get funding anymore from the government, and they just stopped studying it. It's not because we're like all of a sudden able to do these things. It's a lot of it is because he's the first one who took interest in trying to do it, trying to go to Mars, trying to do this. When that
Well,
interest
yeah, he
dropped
had
out,
enough money as a private citizen to really like
do it
pursue it
himself.
on his own outside of the federal government, right?
And that's the same thing you're saying with the UFOs. Is it like if they opened it up to where it was like, I mean, dude, like I'm not like
That
opposed to the some of it being held, kept close to the chest, but if like the government funded and opened up the conversation with like the best physicists and astronomers and other related scientists in the world, and made a a think tank, and made it into a legitimate funded project, yeah, I mean, there could be a lot more answers to the
why
stuff.
we ain't spending money on that transparently, I don't know. Let's spend more money on making the fucking big ass giant gas truck go faster. Some of this shit makes no sense to me. Like sustainability and intelligence go hand in hand. And the less sustainable you are as a species, the more likely you are to die, and the more likely you are to exhibit stupid behavior. You basically killing yourself. You're hella dumb. And so it's all consistent with that shit in the sense that you go back to the vortices, you go back to the ancient cultures. They're using these stones. They got electrodynamic properties in the stones. How much of the earth was being demolished in that sense? They might have lived a more rude day in life, more simple, but it's probably just as awesome as what we're doing now. Now, could we do what we're doing right now? Back then, absolutely not.
Well,
But
yeah, and we have like penicillin and toilet paper, and
penicillin and but maybe back then you
life
just stick
expectancy is
the
short.
fucking pine tree needle in your arm and you're cured from coronavirus. I don't know. I mean,